Hey, we have a fantastic episode today of the 360 Salesforce Mastermind. We have Jodi Hrbek on, who is very familiar and known in the Salesforce ecosystem. A lot of what she does is help Salesforce admins, and she came out with the book, How to Rock Your Role as a Salesforce Admin, which is obviously popular and has helped a lot of admins in the industry. So welcome to the 360 Salesforce podcast, Jodi.
Thank you, John. It's really good to be here. And if I understand correctly, I think this is the beginning of season 2. So congrats on a very successful season 1.
Yes, thank you for being the first episode on season 2. Appreciate it. So to kind of go back a little bit, would you mind going through and letting us know about your background, especially in the Salesforce ecosystem, and then what ultimately inspired you to launch your book, How to Rock Your Role as a Salesforce Admin?
Sure. So, well, much like yourself, I have been in the Salesforce space for quite a while. I like to say it is a career choice that served me well. I think I'm 23 years into my Salesforce journey. For a little, just to ground the conversation, I'll share that my claim to fame is I was actually at the very first Dreamforce. Very different than what it looks like today. It was a small group of people in a hotel. I spoke at the second Dreamforce, and then somewhere around 2004, I hosted at my office what I believe to be was probably one of the very first Salesforce user groups. And some of the people that were at that meeting are still friends and colleagues, and I think the Ohana has continued to provide just tremendous value to me over the years. So I'm happy to be able to pay that forward. I have worked on what I like to say all sides of the table. So I was a customer first and foremost. Then I went to work for Salesforce directly for 4 years, way back in the day. I hung out my shingle as an independent consultant for a number of years. But I have spent the bulk of my career working on the client side, both for some aggressive startups and some very large public companies. So I've been kind of on both sides of that equation as well, where I've had responsibility in director or VP roles for managing the team that is either deployed or supporting Salesforce. So you asked about kind of what led me to write the book. And what I can tell you is there was a point in time when my team was doing a lot of what I call personal heroics. And I was watching this team of extremely talented and, I call it my small but mighty team of admins, right? That were just putting wins on the board every day and doing amazing work. And yet all of us were still feeling at the end of the day like we had this line outside of our door. Right. And we used to joke about what I used to call like McAdmins, right? Where, people are just, running through and shouting orders at us. And, that started getting my thinking around, how are ways that we can do this? How can we work smarter, essentially? And what things do we need to put in play in order to put a method to the madness, if you will? So that was kind of the genesis of the book. And then what was interesting is I started thinking about and kind of witnessing different folks on my team. I started realizing that there was this other component of, again, what I call the McAdmin factor, which was the folks that were newer, more junior, thought that it was their job to do exactly what was asked by the stakeholder, not aware yet that many times, in fact, I would venture to say more often than not, what the stakeholder is asking for isn't necessarily what they need. And it occurred to me over time that that's something that, we need to communicate to junior admins, and we need to give them permission, essentially, to ask questions. I like to say it's your right and responsibility, in fact, and that you're not doing your job when you deliver somebody something different or pause to ask questions, but that is the job. So those two things kind of came together in my mind. And what's interesting, if you've read the book, it opens up with a cartoon that is somebody essentially in the McAdmin's drive-through And I had that cartoon commissioned before I actually wrote the book. That was kind of my inspiration, that I really wanted to find a way to shorten the learning curve for everybody, but on both sides of those equations, help people find ways that they could deliver value as opposed to necessarily just executing what was asked for, but to do it in a way that would prevent overwhelm and would allow people to really thrive in this career.
It makes sense, because I think back, I mean, you've been in the industry a while as well. I think it was, again, Salesforce was simple back in the day, right? The original website, essentially, it was pretty easy just to add fields, make changes. It was a pretty, quote unquote, simple system, right? And I think you must have, I'm assuming you saw as Salesforce was getting more advanced, that those issues and challenges only magnified with being, quote unquote, the order takers, and just kind of building things that weren't really discussed, or make sure you had that interface and discussion with the client. I'm assuming it probably magnified those challenges as Salesforce was evolving.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this, even in its most simple day, right? And when we say simple for folks that, haven't been around as long as we have, it was a lot less complex. There were, we always had the ability, at least from the day that I started, to add custom objects, but our standard objects, there were very few, and the use cases were much more simple, if you will. But what I would say, Jon, is even back then, it was important for us to understand the business and understand the domain of selling, and then eventually the domain of customer service, so that we could translate those asks into exactly what they needed, right? Because our stakeholders didn't know what they didn't know. They didn't know, they weren't experts in Salesforce. We were. And what I would tell you that I think has been interesting over the years is we use the term accidental admin a lot. And I think what a lot of people don't necessarily understand about, where the origin of that term is, the reason that most of us were accidental admins back in the day is we were part of the business teams that were using Salesforce, right? So my background, I was a sales trainer. I was involved in business development initiatives. So I was in there creating the system that I needed, or that the team needed, in order to, actually execute some of the initiatives that I was in charge of. And I think that was the case for a lot of people when we first started. What I think has been interesting as Salesforce, to your point, has become more complex is people are starting to be the teams that support it, that are part of the technology team often instead of part of the business, or people that are trained up as technologists that have never been in the business, which I think is the reason that we're starting to see the role of product management, or sometimes we would call it business analysis, depending on kind of, where you sit. But that, that used to be part and parcel of what we did as the administrators of the system. And where I really see the big difference is over time, as the system has really required increasingly more complex technical skills. And I mean, just the pace of what, I'm going to say we're leading toward more programmatic concepts. I think flow was really the inflection point. It's no longer reasonable and feasible that somebody's going to come in and have that level of expertise on what I like to call the front of the house and the back of the house. So I think that is a really big sea change that has occurred over the years, but certainly in the last several years.
Makes sense. And when we talk about asking questions and getting to understand the business, and especially with the role of the admin, do you see that even your book, How to Rock Your Role as a Salesforce Admin, does that also apply to business analysts? As that has grown as well? And how do those two roles, from that perspective of interfacing with the business, understanding the requirements, and the function of the admin, how do those also overlap, and how do those two roles best work together?
Sure. So what I tell everybody is, I don't care what your job title is or what your role is. Every single Salesforce professional at different times, or most times, also has to put on that BA cap, right? I mean, that is part and parcel of no matter what your job is on a project. making sure that we've got the business context, that we understand the why behind the ask. It may or may not be our job to ask the stakeholder, right? If we are in a role that's more back of the house and we have somebody that's essentially the liaison with our business users, it may be that we're not asking the stakeholders, but it's still our right, and I would argue responsibility, to make sure that we understand that from that person, right, before we start to execute. It's the reason that I say, the story is the beginning of a conversation. It is the jumping off point for a conversation. It is not a mandate for work to do, because you can't possibly, even with the best story, even with the best acceptance criteria, we can't possibly know all the different things that we need to know, because it doesn't exist in the story. It exists out here around the edges. So to answer that question, that's everybody's responsibility, right? I always say, asking questions is a team sport. Getting the information we need is a team sport. There are so many different flavors of admin. Sometimes it is hard to answer the question of what does an admin do, because we could describe 100 different jobs and they're all quote unquote Salesforce admins. And in fact, I'll tell you what's kind of interesting. Like, same with the role of BA, right? The business analyst role only, officially started creeping into the Salesforce ecosystem, I would say maybe within the last 5 years or so, right? Again, it was something, and I would even jump back to say my belief in this in terms of why Salesforce as an ecosystem is a little bit late in the game compared to traditional software development is, for years, we walked around under the mantra of no software, right? So I think we were like the antithesis. And so if they were doing that over in the software world, like, oh, that doesn't apply to us. And so I think, unfortunately, it also means that we skipped some, really good practices and habits and frameworks and things that other software development teams had been working on for a long time, because we were working under the assumption that it's Salesforce, not software, right? And so I believe that we are still catching up with that in some sense of the word. And I think, what's interesting is I did a survey. It was very unscientific, mind you. It was on LinkedIn last year. And I had about 250 responses. And the question was specifically for business analysts. If you are a BA, do you have hands-on keyboard responsibilities? And I broke it down specifically to say, like, a little bit as it pertains to maybe reports and dashboards. And then no, a little bit, or yes, I actually do config. And it was well over 50% had some degree of hands-on keyboard responsibility. I think that's unusual to Salesforce. I would venture to say that I believe, just from the people that I talk to in traditional BA, that's, platform agnostic, that's really not what they're doing. They are really focused on business analysis and the kind of the work around gathering the requirements, not executing them. So my sense is what we're starting to see is people recognizing there's a need for that, maybe haven't fully invested in that yet, right? So we're starting to tag people as BAs, but we haven't fully staffed the team the way that we, want to or need to. So the BA is still somebody that either used to do config or still needs to do config. So I think we're going to continue to see that evolve over time. The role of product or product management, kind of fits in the same place. And just like in the agile world, I think people are trying to figure out how BA and product fit together and where that's going to land. My general sense is, over time, we need to look much more like traditional software teams. And that people are starting to realize as it has become more complex, that Salesforce needs the same care and feeding as any other, part of the tech stack. However, I'm going to always continue to beat the drum that says we are unique, and that there are a lot of things that we can and should be able to create and deploy for our users a lot faster. And we have to find the secret sauce on some of that stuff so that we don't become all the things we didn't want to be, right? And we don't lose the beauty that we all experience by being able to be business people that could create business applications that were real value add. So I always like to say things like, if it is taking you months to deploy list views because they're going into refinement discussions and backlogs, and they're not something that we can operationalize quickly. Just as an example, we got to go relook at that because we got to make sure that we don't lose our secret sauce.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think part of what you're mentioning about the analysts having that Salesforce background, it's like a double-edged sword, because when they're talking with the clients, a lot of the clients always want to ask, can we do this in Salesforce? Can we do this in Salesforce? And they'll be like, yeah, we can do that. Right. And then they go back to the development team or the admins and like, whoa, wait, you told them we could do that. Right. And it is a good way to have some lines to really delineate responsibilities, and really get what the business is looking for versus can Salesforce do this? And then kind of having that process go. So I
The thing
understand
that
your.
I would say, though, that I would really challenge Salesforce as a company to do is all of the training, maybe I'm going to use the word all, most of the training that's available on Trailhead is designed for people who are going to be hands-on keyboard resources. And even though they have added the BA certification and added some, knowledge transfer as it pertains to the business analysis role, if you want to know enough to be dangerous about Salesforce, there's not really an easy way to do that, right? That, there are concepts that I think BAs and product managers need to understand, certainly the art of the possible, right? And what's easy and what's hard, and what is the difference between configuration and dev, and why does it matter in terms of ongoing maintenance and ability to iterate. And certainly they need to understand, the standard features of the platform, and they need to understand enough about roles and profiles so that they can go ask those questions. Like, there is knowledge that is incredibly important. Data models. I believe that everybody needs to have some level of data model fluency to go out and ask the questions that are usually business questions, but that are going to influence the data model. And I've just found it challenging myself, as I've been working with people that are really skilled BAs or product people without Salesforce experience. Unless I personally invested the time to do all of that training, there's not an easy way to say, just go to Trailhead to do this, because that's not the level of detail they need. So Salesforce, if you're listening, run out a challenge for you. Like, we got to keep up with where we're going.
That's awesome. And I guess to get out of the X's and O's per se a little bit, to look back and take a step back, what was it like writing the book, How to Rock Your Role as a Salesforce Admin? And I'm also curious where the name came from, or what inspired you to have that name for the book.
Okay, well, I'm going to talk about the book first, because the book was certainly a journey. I started the book. I had mentioned that I had kind of finished this huge project. I actually quit my job in really a state of burnout. So all of those things that I was talking about before were very real and personal, and it gave me time to have some of that reflection where I said, how could I have been a better leader, and how could I have set up some different processes that would have made the team. We had a very successful technical rollout, but it shouldn't have left me to the point where I was like, I'm so burned out, I can't even think about, Salesforce or work for a while. So I took a month or two off, and I got a lot of it written out, kind of the concepts. As I mentioned, I got my inspiration, which was my cartoon. And then, of course, as it tends to happen, I went back to the job, or new job, and it went in a drawer and kind of sat there for a while. And I cannot tell a lie. I probably was lucky that there was a pandemic when it happened, because I think this book may still be, sitting half done somewhere, if not for a lockdown where I spent most of my downtime actually working on getting that done.
Interesting. So how long did it take roughly? Was it a year or 2 months?
So here's what's interesting. I think it took me about 8 months to get it done, almost done. I would say it was at the 90% mark. I hired an editor. I had an editor go through it. And true story, it took me probably another 8 months to get the courage to click publish and actually get it out in the world. What finally happened is I have a good buddy who had read a version of it And 8 months later, I'm literally just polishing a word here or there, and in retrospect, of course, it was procrastination because I just didn't have the confidence to do it. There was no more work that needed to be done in this book. But I sent it over to him, and he realized what was going on and shook his head and said, I'll talk about this book with you as much as you want once you publish it, but I'm done talking to you about it till you hit go. So he threw the
Awesome.
gauntlet down. So
That's
thanks,
awesome.
Kesh. I appreciate you on that one if you're listening. But I will also tell you, because I think a lot of people, are going to relate to this. I didn't have a LinkedIn following. Like you started this conversation by saying I do a lot on LinkedIn. Up until that point, I was busy working just like a lot of other people. Right. And LinkedIn was a tool that I used for a little bit of networking here and there. And really that was about it. And as I started thinking about, I have to go take this book out to the world and figure out who was actually going to even know it's there and want to buy it. I got to start thinking about how I'm going to market this book. So that got me thinking about LinkedIn. But also it was like, oh, I got to publish my thoughts and say words. And so
Yep.
LinkedIn is also how I started getting that confidence and that muscle memory of put my words out there and, getting people to engage with my ideas and my thoughts. And so, I relate very much to people that, kind of are like, I'm supposed to be on LinkedIn. Everybody says it, but it's hard, and it is hard. And I often worry that, people see that, I post a lot on LinkedIn. I have a lot of followers. You know what? I started in the exact place that you are and you are and you are, right? And it was hard, and it gets easier over time. And that was the same thing with that book. And, once I did it, it was the greatest thing I ever did, just personally, just in terms of, how proud I am of it. I wish I would have done it sooner. I can't wait to do it again. But, I have huge props for people that are, in the middle of career transitions, whatever that may be. A lot of people that are in my network are coming into the ecosystem. And it is hard. And all I can say is like, do it. It's the action that breeds the confidence, and the confidence breeds the confidence, and nothing happens till we hit go. So, but I'm cheering
That's
you on.
awesome.
They're
That's
listening.
awesome. And I'm just curious because I know you were excited and I guess kind of nervous if that's the right word. But do you remember when like either a notification or an email or something came in that someone was the first person to buy your book?
Um, I don't know if it was the first. Well, actually, that's not true. What I remember is the first person who posted a really awesome post about it online, and it wasn't very long that it had been out there. And then those
Awesome.
started coming in. It was like, wait, what? Like, I think this is resonating. So it was
Awesome.
really fun, and that's the reason I say it's the thing. I've done a lot of great projects in my lifetime, just over 25 years. So I'm certainly proud of those things professionally, but just in terms of how rewarding it is to get an email from somebody that says, hey, I read your book. You suggested this. I did it. I just got a promotion. Or, hey, I read your book. It gave me an idea. I just took that, tatted that talk track into an interview, and I swear it's why I got the job. Like that is to me just, kind of what it's all about. So thank you, everybody that shares
Awesome.
those stories as well.
That's awesome.
Okay, you didn't say about the title though, because I really want to
Yes.
talk to you about the
Yes.
title. And this is another reason that I say, guys, if you have ideas, you got to get out there because somebody's going to beat you to the punchline. So, the original title of my book was the Salesforce Admin Playbook. And as I was, sitting around not publishing it for all the reasons we've talked about, my friend Martin Gessner, who a lot of people know, the founder of Focus on Force, created a book and published it called the
Aw.
Salesforce Career Playbook. So you asked me about things I remember, John. I certainly remember seeing that and being like, oh. So I
That's
had to go
awesome.
back to the drawing board and come up with a new name.
That's awesome. And I think it was one of those not it's one of those things that happen that I think How to Rock Your Role as a Salesforce admin is perfect. Like it's such a great title. It resonates, it's different, it's unique. So I think maybe it's one of those things where I think the title is just awesome. So
Yeah,
it probably
thank you.
worked out anyway. So I guess flipping from kind of that aspect to what you're planning on doing in the future, and what your direction is moving forward. I know you're coming out with another book, along with, I believe, training, work sessions, etc. Could you give us some more info on kind of what's coming up with the next book?
Sure. Thank you for asking. So, what I would tell you, because a lot of people say, are you pivoting? And the answer is no, I'm not pivoting. I'm just expanding on what I've been doing. And the downside of writing that book, Rock Your Role as a Salesforce Admin, or at least of using that term admin in the title, is, people were under the impression, and to a certain extent, rightly so, that it was a book just for Salesforce admins. And obviously that was my ideal avatar. That was my reader. That was my team. So that was my intent, was to create that book for admins. But the stuff that I wrote about wasn't applicable only to admins. And so one of the things that I've heard from so many people who've read it is like, man, this is applicable for, all of my team, or Salesforce consultants should be reading this, or, architects, or any technologists. I mean, people sent me all sorts of things. I gave it to my wife. They specialize in, Mercado, whatever it is. I've heard a lot of those things. So that was kind of something that I'd been thinking about. And then the other thing that kind of came out of the book is the number of people that really, I guess would say, had an aha moment on the power of questions. And this is something that I don't think I realized until I started getting feedback from readers, is not something that is intuitive or taught to a lot of technologists. And so going back to what I said earlier, like, I started my career in sales. I was a sales trainer. I ran sales operations, which means I was involved in sales enablement and sales training initiatives. And when you grow up in that space, this concept of asking questions and doing discovery and marrying the problem to the right size solution, right? That's what good salespeople do. That's language that we know, that's behavior that we teach and that we emulate and that we learn because we're around people that are really good at it. And so what was interesting when I wrote the book is the number of people that said to me, it just never occurred to me. In fact, somebody said, it never occurred to me that I could, let alone that I should, ask questions. And this goes back to kind of when I said I'd had some of those real junior admins that, thought that they were being disrespectful or insubordinate if they didn't, immediately just go do what somebody said. And so as I've really been thinking about it, that's kind of the piece that most lights me up right now. And so I am, going all in on certainly soft skills, but communication skills, but really with a focus on what I call the art of asking. So I am in the process as we speak of taking a workshop that I've developed, a real world workshop, might I add. I don't know about everybody else, but I'm suffering from a little bit of Zoom fatigue and kind of have really enjoyed being back out in the world. And I think in particular, when we're talking about communication skills or human skills or the art of, having conversations that are impactful, it's not that we don't need to do it online, but I think there's something that kind of gets, lights us up when we get a chance to do it in person. So www.thequestionworkshop.com is kind of my new focus right now. I'm taking it out first to Texas, which is my own backyard. But I'm going to be going on essentially a road show over the course of the year, taking that out to different cities, as well as making that available as an offering inside organizations who are looking to upskill their teams. The workshop title specifically is Ask to Uncover, which is a framework that I use. And specifically, it's how to use questions to deliver the right solution every time.
Makes sense. So then because I mentioned there was a book. So is it workshop focused? These are more intimate on-site workshops to work through these things in person, or is there also a book along with it?
Yeah, the book's not there yet. It's
Okay.
it's in process, but it'll be essentially a companion piece to this topic.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, that sounds exciting. It's nice to get back out there again. I think people learn a lot more in person as well. That actually sounds exciting. So then, for companies that, what's a what type of company, what type of situation, um, who would best benefit from bringing you in with what they have going on to do these workshops?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. My general sense is it would be a great fit for a company that wants to train up their Salesforce team, for instance, right, on the art of asking. So their technology team as a whole, by the way. So people often say, is your content Salesforce specific? And I say my stories tend to be Salesforce specific because that's the work that I've been doing. But, delivery of a technology solution, even delivery of a report, whatever these things are, really it's the same concepts, right? It doesn't really matter one way or the other. And I've intentionally put some people through the workshop just to figure out, like, is this just Salesforce specific? And I don't believe so. That's really my intent. Consulting firms that are looking for an opportunity to, again, upskill. I've heard from a lot of people that have said, Jodi, I've hired these people. They're excellent technical resources, but I'm afraid that they're just not as comfortable asking the questions as I need them to. And, the course is a little bit about mindset, right? Because depending on where we are in our career, sometimes even if we're very established in our career, there's particular situations that make us less reluctant to ask. So, like I would throw this out to the audience, what about when somebody, with a really important title comes, right? And asks you for something. They've got a C level in front of their name. Like, how often have we kind of like forget all the questions we normally ask? Oh, I've got it. Right. Or this one's very common. Something's broken in production, right? And all of a sudden we go run and, like that's probably when we should be most focused on questions, right? But so there's these kind of mindset things that we need to get over. There's some elements of communication skills. So the tone and tenor, the how we ask questions to ensure that our stakeholders are going to be willing and engaged as they answer. And then I think there's as well really a piece that I call investigative inquiry, which is an appreciation of all the different ways that questions can be used as a strategic tool. And a lot of times when I tell people I specialize in questions, they go, oh, you teach people how to do discovery? And I say, well, that's part of it. That's really just a little part of it, right? That I think there's an underappreciation of all the different ways from the very time the ask comes in until even after it's delivered, where, being comfortable knowing what questions to ask and how to use them, as I like to say, to guide the conversation, to validate assumptions, and to make sure that we're delivering what I like to call the right and right-sized solution. So pretty much, I think any organization that is, has a team that's involved with delivery of some way, shape, or form could benefit.
That makes sense because along those lines is kind of one thing I was going to ask as well, that we discussed before when we were chatting. But what's that essentially, if you could kind of sum up in the one main benefit of asking the right questions that it has on the outcome of the success and quality of the solution?
Yeah. I believe without a shadow of a doubt that the quality of your questions impacts the quality of your deliverables, the quality of your solutions, like bar none. And in fact, that's kind of what we do in the course of this is we kind of present all the reasons that's true, validate it, and then give people the skills to be able to take that out and execute on it or apply it. And the reason that I'm so bullish on this, John, is a couple different reasons. One is it's hard to be a Salesforce professional right now. Like, I don't think there's enough appreciation for how much change there is, how much there is to learn. Whether that's because Salesforce is rolling out new things, whether that's when we're putting AI on top of it, whether it's just the pace of life and business in general. Like, it's hard. There's a lot of different things that we have to stay on top of. And so the beauty of, especially when you bring a team together to get everybody even incrementally better in what I call their askability, right? Is that if we can just collectively get a little bit better up front about making sure that we understand the ask, right? So we're not off building something different than what's expected, that we can understand the impact or the the value of solving that problem or the value of what essentially the opportunity is, so we can make sure that we're not developing or underdeveloping or overdeveloping, right? It's like the Goldilocks. We want to bring just the right size solution for what you need. If we can do all of these things throughout the life cycle of it, we are incrementally, or I should even say exponentially, more likely to be solving the right thing the first time with the right solution, that everybody's going to nod heads and agree is exactly what is needed. And so from my perspective, if you want to do one thing that can improve your project outcomes, it doesn't need to be that you're going out and learning a new technology or going deep in the weeds. Sometimes it can be as simple as really considering all the different ways to use questions, considering almost like a checklist. Have we asked all the different areas? Have we ensured alignment? Have we done all these things? And without a shadow of a doubt, I think teams can deliver better quality, have a better impact, have a better time working on the project, right? Nobody wants to be the one that shows up with this report that they thought was just supposed to be this little thing where somebody was expecting something dramatically different, right? That's not fun. It takes away from the value that we get from our rewards and recognition. So in my mind, it's the hill that I'm going to die on. I think it's the number one way that without doubt, every single project team can immediately improve the quality of their deliverables is really just some focus on improving the quality of their questions.
Perfect. That's awesome. It sounds fantastic. And I think what you mentioned, it can apply outside of the Salesforce ecosystem as well. So that's good for people to think about as well, if you're looking for something like this. And then I guess we always, this has been fantastic. And I always end essentially with mainly one question, and it's kind of a prediction thing, but what's your overall prediction or thoughts on where the Salesforce ecosystem is going in the next 3-5 years? Kind of some of the bigger things that might change, AI, etc. What's your thoughts on where Salesforce is going in the next 5 years overall?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a question I spent a lot of time thinking about. The evolution of the admin, right? That's probably a book that I've got half written somewhere in here that I was ready to go all in on until this AI thing came. And I was like, I'm not weighing in on that until this thing plays out for a while. But, we started this conversation already talking about just the huge sea change that has occurred, right, over the years with the complexity of the platform and the impact that has had on the admin role. And, increasingly we're seeing that admins are wanting to move toward I'm going to say the developer side of the house, right? Learning engineering principles and things like that. 10 years ago, we would have said that's crazy town, right? That these jobs are really different and you're either or. And, if you think you're both, you're probably not self-actualized to know you're not good at one of those things, right?
Right.
But, with the platform being what it is today and the use cases, like that needs to happen. And I think the people that are doing hands-on keyboard work need to continue to focus on that, which is why we're going to continue to see the rise of, again, the BA and the product roles that are going to be really doing more of what I call the front of the house work. We do need to figure out how we get them appropriate training. I think increasingly we're seeing specialization is going to be important, that there's absolutely just too much to learn. There's, whether it be based on an industry or a cloud or a particular area of expertise. You might be an automation expert or a data migration expert or whatever those things may be. But I think that there's just too much that the generalists will, never going to say they're going to go away, right? Because we've said there's a million different kinds of companies that use Salesforce and there's always going to be a need for those. But if we had to look at the trends and the themes and certainly what I advise people in terms of, how to be thinking about their role if they want to stay in the ecosystem. I think, the riches are in the niches, as they like to say. But I also think there is a huge unknown, and I think we can all opine all day long on how we think AI is going to influence the role. I don't think any of us can possibly know for sure. What I can venture a guess on is that the technology itself is going to be increasingly commoditized because the machines are going to be able to do a lot of it. They're going to be able to do a lot of it faster. We still need to understand why they're doing it and be the humans to validate it so it doesn't negate the fact that we need to have that knowledge. But I think what we are going to see increasingly is the skills that are really valued are the skills that are relating to making sure that we understand the question, right? Making sure we understand what they're trying to solve for and why, making sure that we are delivering the right thing in the right order and that the organization is ready and the users are ready to be able to absorb that and adopt it and use it. And so, it's part of the reason I'm all in on the human skills. And I think, even when we look at things like really cool change, I forgot what the word they use, the tools like Elements, .cloud, what's the word that they call
change intelligence and
change intelligence. Thank you. Those tools are going to be brilliant in terms of helping us figure out, what's in our org, maybe even making recommendations for how an org should be set up or how something should be built. But the truth of the matter is so many of those inputs don't live in the metadata. And, that's the thing that I always stretch is, even if we're talking about, hey, should we use, we need a new object, or we have this use case that, is going to do something that likely necessitates a new object. And we have a decision, like we already have one that does something kind of similar. Just looking at the metadata is going to say, well, you should use this. There's a whole lot of questions and conversations. Who are the actors? Are there license costs involved? How operationally similar are these or are these not? Just whatever these things are, even as we're thinking about our roadmaps, right? A lot of decisions that we make, they're things that are based on what's in a stakeholder's head, what's their motivation, what's their plans for the future, all of those things that, again, don't live in the metadata. So, I believe it's going to be more imperative than ever as we can do things faster, that we have to make sure that we're doing the right things the right way, for the right reasons, in the right order. And I think those skills are going to be really what differentiate, the people that really stand out in the role.
Makes sense. Because I think context matters as well. I think that's one thing AI hasn't mastered yet is context. And I think that's where that human liaison and those human skills are still critical. I agree. And this has been awesome, Jodi. I appreciate you being on and going through kind of your background, the experience, the book. So the book, How to Rock Your Role as a Salesforce Admin, do people find that on Amazon, Kindle, or where can they find that?
Yeah. Rock Your Role as a Salesforce Admin. You can find it on Amazon. It's available on Audible as well. I did do the recording. It took me another year, John, to finally get that recording out in the world. But
nice.
I know a lot of people are reading quote unquote through audio these days, because once I got that out there, my percent of paperbacks fell dramatically and shifted over to the audiobook. So that's there. thequestionworkshop.com. If you want to see if I'm coming to a city near you, and anybody can always reach out to me. I'm very accessible on LinkedIn. I'm not always immediately responsive, but I usually catch up at least on weekends. And, I'm happy to connect with anyone. I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts on anything I've said today. If you think about it a little bit differently. If you've been a reader, thank you for that. Shoot me a note. Tell me something that resonated in the book. And John, thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Thank you, Jodi. It was fantastic. Very informative. And thank you for being guest number 1 on season 2. And talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you.